with China. And what will be the larger fallout of this all? What's Washington on the other hand? How do they take these sentiments? And you rightly mentioned that it's the de-risking that they are interested in, and that's affordable even. Decoupling is not. You can even rightly I can put some more things to it. Is that uh, the China US trade is on the record high in the last year, 690 billion dollars. It's because they couldn't decouple. The simple reason is that the preferable strategy is de-risk. What's the larger fallout, Swasti, if we briefly look at it, for the larger geopolitics of the world and the US supremacy and the global order?
So, Miraj, in my understanding, the larger fallout is that despite, if you cut the rhetoric and come to the main point, is that China will be a major formidable player, an economic player, of course, right? And you have to take out or think of ways to deal with China in a way which is conducive, better conducive to your economic security. Okay, that's one. And I think the other bigger fallout is definitely, I mean, somewhere this the sense or the tone of reconciliation, if you want to read between the lines, that US also doesn't want a complete decoupling. It's not possible, and it sounds really, I would say, foolish, to look at the trade figures and say that we want to decouple it. It doesn't really make any sense. So, if you want to genuinely make sense, and I'm just repeating things for you, that yeah, the understanding that you cannot wish away China, you have to find out ways in which are more conducive to your economic security, because like I said, that's another thing that actually COVID taught us, and not just the war in Ukraine. COVID, if you remember, what was the biggest takeaway from COVID? The biggest takeaway from COVID was that we live in a world which is extremely interconnected, and you can't just wish away things, right? That okay, COVID originated, the COVID-19, the coronavirus emerged, or whatever, in a Wuhan lab. So you just punish China by stop buying stuff that is Chinese. So it sounds very good, on TikTok and Twitter and all that, but that is not how state policies are made. So the other thing that COVID taught everybody was this entire discourse, this new entire refurbished discourse on resilience of supply chains. Okay. Now, why resilience of supply chains is important? Because I think people don't even understand that, and everybody uses it, but nobody understands that. What is resilience of supply chains? So when you talk about economics, and it is important because I feel when it comes to students, a lot of students don't understand it. See, when you talk about supply chains, the logic, the purely economic logic, would tell you that you know what, you should try and do economics in a manner which is the most cost effective manner, and the most cost effective way is to have the most efficient supply chains. So Japan, for example, in the 80s and 90s, just before their bubble burst, was a champion of the efficient supply chains. And in fact, if you remember our external affairs minister's remarks, in fact, there was a talk, if you go through his tweets, there was a time when he tweeted that the world is now sort of waking up to to a realization that this Nagoya style efficient supply chains will not really rise up to occasion. And what did he mean? So basically, China rose up to this level economically because it became very efficient to trade with China, right? It was very cost efficient. China had a massive manufacturing base, and it was far cheaper to produce, say, an Apple phone in China than to produce it in America, right? And that was the logic, okay? That was the purely economic, basic logic, okay, of why China became the economic giant that it became. But again, so while you put into place a system which is efficient, but you did not really think of the worst case scenario. And what COVID told us is that just by having or focusing on economic policies or supply chains that are very efficient, it could be okay, but it will not work in times of a crisis. In times of a crisis, what you require is that where is the cushion? You need a cushion to fall back on, right? I mean, what about the rainy days? And because COVID-19 stretched on for 2 long years and the entire world economy came to a standstill, people realized that, listen, the rainy day insurance is not something that should be thought of as something which is like far away in the horizon. Somewhere we will think of it when we get there, but it is something that we live with every day. A war can disrupt it. Okay, a COVID-19 pandemic can disrupt it. Another major, some sort of a terrorist attack, a cyber attack, some sort of a major hacking would, do it. So we are actually living in very vulnerable times. And one of the ways to address that vulnerability is to try and focus, spend money, invest on resilient supply chains. Now, what is resilient? That even if they are not very efficient, they might take more money. You may be spending more money to produce them, but end of the day, you will still have a cushion in them when the days turn bad. And therefore, don't focus all your energies on that one factor, on the one actor of China. Diversify, 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 right? That is how you build resilience. So it could be expensive for you to build that resilience, but it will really support you, because the rainy days thing that you always thought was really far away is not really that far away, but actually we are living in extremely vulnerable times. And that understanding of building resilience in supply chains was already there. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated it to a level that it became probably the most talked about phrase in international economics and international geopolitics. And then, just as we were still recovering from the unfinished project of recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine happened. And then again, food security, energy prices, everything, our own stock market, I mean, everything, started to rally around it. So the major takeaway, I mean, about what is there in all this de-risking everything, what is the heart of it? Heart of it is that how do you become more risk, I would say, how do you manage better the risks of your trade? And that is why today, when we talk about economics, we just don't talk about efficient economics, but we talk about an economics which is secure economics. Okay, so economic security has become the mantra. And in economic security, you have to have resilience. You have to have some sort of a formula, some sort of a mechanism, framework to to deal with situations like this. And that is why today, Mehraj, and just the last thing, it will be very beneficial for the students actually, that you understand that trade cannot be divorced from technological aspects. When you talk about technological aspects, you are talking about a lot of emerging tech. When you're talking about emerging tech, you have to realize that actually the world does not have norms and rules to actually tackle the rise of all this emerging tech and all the sensitive tech. So therefore, if today you want to have a trade relation with another partner, with another country that can stand the test of time, you don't just do trade deals or FTAs. You set up what is known as the TTC. What is the TTC? The Trade and Technology Council, which actually links all these issues together and says that trade is not going to happen in a silo. Sorry, no. Trade is going to happen with technology. When you talk about technology, there would be standards, there would be 5G, sensitive technology. Do you have the norms to regulate it? If not, are you willing to co-design those norms with us? That is why the European Union signed its first Trade and Technology Council with the US. I think that was 2021, 2020, I could be wrong. But yes, around that time. The second Trade and Technology Council that the European Union signed is with India, okay? Because everybody understood that there has to be a component of trust, which cannot be overlooked in the name of efficiency or cost benefit analysis, etc. Because you understand that you have to have that basic trust of co-designing the norms that are required for tackling the challenges of all the emerging tech and the AI and the cyber domains, etc., and the standards that are set for it. So that is, I would say, is where economic relations are going. It is not going to be a simple buyer-seller relationship. I mean, that is not where the world is looking. That is not which is going to take world very far.
We'll be talking in this part about the other important issue is that Russia-Ukraine war. What are the current developments? What are its fallouts on the larger European energy security and world energy security? And how has it, helped into the rebuilding and reapproachment of the entire geopolitical setting of the world? How have countries actually either one or the other way trying to jostle and trying to get on one side or the other side. What are your takeaways from this war?
So the first thing, right? There is So the first thing, so there is a major war in happening in Europe, and that major war has had repercussions which are valid for almost everybody in the world, in terms of food security and in terms of all the cascading effects that generally a war would come up with, which is volatility of markets, volatility of commodity prices, inflation, overall, so to say, global economic activity, etc. Now that's one. Now, the other unmissable point of this war, Miraj, is that there is a rising voice in the world. You could call them the global south. You could call them the countries that do not wish to be aligned, which is that, listen, at the end of the day, we don't really want to join this war in condemning somebody, not condemning somebody, because it's not really our war. And that is, I mean, in technical things, you would like to describe it as the rise of multipolarity. Okay, there is a sense of a bloc which does not really wish to be aligned, which wishes to keep its own national interest first, and not really get into this blame games, because they say that whatever it is, we want to condemn it. I mean, we want to condemn war particularly. We want to say that it's not the time for war, but at the same time, we don't really want to join this part or that part and the UN resolutions and all that. So I look at it in terms of these things, that yes, the war has impacted everybody. The war is in fact now getting into a very serious phase, because you can understand this phase of Russia-Ukraine war. It was always meant to end in about 3 to 5 days, because that was the pattern of how Russia was winning its wars in 2008 and 2014. So even when this war started, all the preparation around it was that it'll perhaps go on for 3 to 5 days, maximum a week, and they'll take down Kyiv, and so be it. And then there'll be just like they did in Russia did that formula that it had for Georgia, which is that in 2008 Russia attacked these countries. Invaded these two regions, and the regions were South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and they were declared independent, and they have ever since been independent. I mean, obviously, about only 4 or 5 countries actually ratified their independence. For the rest of the world, including the UN, they are still disputed territory. So that was what happened in 2008, and perhaps that was the same kind of a formula that Russia wanted to have for Ukraine, which is that, see, Donbass anyway has our supporters. We are going to invade, and we are going to basically declare them independent, and then things will just continue the way they were. But I think they kind of missed out on the fact that the CIA had been training, Americans had been training Ukrainians since 2014, number one. And number two, what is in the minds of the Ukrainians themselves? So Russia did not get the welcome they thought they'll get. They thought they'll be welcomed by garlands and they would be looked upon as liberators. On the contrary, Ukrainians were willing to lose it all, because they did not want to settle for the territorial disturbance of their country. And they said that, no, we are not going to do it. And I think there is a lot of, I would say, opinion in the world about Zelensky, and Zelensky is looked upon as somebody who is only carrying out orders from the US. My own reading is a little different, because you see, nobody who is just a puppet would actually stay in a war-torn country for almost 1.5 years now. Okay, so you have to somewhere give it to the Ukrainians that, listen, they elected that person, and he has really taken that charge, and you cannot take that away, from the Ukrainians, that they are willing to do whatever it takes to fight for their country. That's number one. So the war started like that, and then, long story short, when Kyiv did not fall, then there was a lot of criticism about it. We do not hear about it. Why? Because obviously in Russia, there is the information around it is extremely tightly controlled. And the only primary data that we have as researchers also is the data which is available on Telegram, which is a platform like WhatsApp. And on Telegram, they have these channels. And if you go to the official handles of, say, for example, Prigozhin is the chief of the Wagner group. Similarly, you have all these handles of the military book bloggers and all the war, I would say, enthusiasts. And not just that, also Ramzan Kadyrov. And Ramzan Kadyrov is the Chechen leader who, when the war started, actually alleged that all my army, Ramzan Kadyrov is also the head of the president of the Chechen Republic there, which is a part of Russia. And he has his loyalty towards Putin, and he said that my fighters are going to fight, and this is he said that it is going to be jihad for them. So he brought in that angle, etc. So all these people, they have their handles, they are constantly there on Telegram, they're talking about it, and actually, if you ask me, that's the only primary data we have, because otherwise there is no information coming out from Russia. It is forbidden to even call it a war. So you would either hear Russians who are now no longer in Russia who talk about it, or you get the views from all these Telegram channels. And in fact, if you look at ISW, Institute for the Study of War, which is, I think, by far the most systematic and valid representation of all the maps and everything, from they cross check it with satellite imagery, etc. Even their primary source is the Telegram handles of all these people that I just mentioned, because they are major stakeholders. So then there came a time in the war when the Russian military was having problems, logistical problems, operational problems, because they did not really have a plan B. They only had a plan A. And very early on in the war, when we used to say that, we were very careful of not falling into the Western propaganda. But as the war stretched on, we kind of realized that, no, this is not really propaganda. The Russians did not really have a plan B. The plan A was to take down Kiev in about 5 days, 6 days. And when it did not happen like that, and when the Russian convoys were attacked and all that, when the javelins and stingers and all the anti-tank weapons, the Ukrainians started using them very efficiently, then Russia did not know what to do. And then, if you see, then there came a time when they started the aerial bombing, okay, because obviously Russia is a very formidable air power. But again, you'd see how the US intelligence, etc., played a role and supported Ukraine. So, long story short, there came a time when it was seen that the Russian military itself is not going to, help much, and you wanted the extra, legal armies, which are the private armies. And I think the most famous one is Wagner, because Wagner has had massive successes in Syria, in North Africa. In fact, Wagner is so important out there that the European Union has actually come up with something called the European Peace Facility, and the European Peace Facility is actually tailor-made to take on the Wagner group in Africa. Okay, I mean, it is supporting Ukraine as well, but Joseph Borrell would say that it's not really an instrument only for Ukraine. It has a global thing, but their major thing lies in Africa. So they are basically there to fight the Wagner. So you can understand how big Wagner is. So the Prigozhin was involved in the war, Kadyrov was involved in the war, and very early on, they started discussing all these problems, the logistics and the operational problems, and it was always dismissed because, Russia is also perceived as the world's number 2 military, which obviously, if you look at the nuclear arsenal, etc., it's completely true. Now, what happens is that now there is a long-standing war. It has become a war of attrition. Russia is, bombing the Ukrainians. Now the formula is very simple. Okay, the formula is like who outdoes the other person first. Okay, how? So Russia's strategy is that, listen, the West is not going to support Ukraine endlessly. Okay, so you have to just keep the war on till the time the support starts to wane. And that time is not very far. That time is round the corner. In 2023, perhaps things are really looking very good for Ukraine. 2024, around the end of 2024, after all, these are democratic countries, and all this money that is being sent to Ukraine is coming from the taxpayers, and taxpayers don't really want it because they are facing inflations, etc. So ultimately, there will be, if there is a change in the US leadership, for example, if there's somebody like the MAGA comes back, or even the Republicans, they will not really support Ukraine the way Democrats have, right? So that is the Russian strategy, that fine, let's just delay it long enough to reach a point where the Western support starts to wane. The Western strategy is that, okay, we know how much can we support. 2023, every single penny that is going into Ukraine war is already worked out. 2023 is not a problem. 2024, The entirety is not a problem. Towards the end, if the president changes, then it will be a problem. But their argument is that we know that the Russian military is very vulnerable because of all these videos. And if you look at the leaks, the leaks said that, okay, you can't expect too much from Ukrainians, but the Russians are also having problems. So if you were to really take advantage of their vulnerabilities, you could perhaps go to, get to a point where you can actually make them to sit on the negotiating table and talk. And that is where the logic of the counteroffensive is going, because counteroffensive is not aimed, Mehraj, unlike what a lot of people think, it is not about a binary clear-cut victory or a loss anymore. The counteroffensive is aimed at making or building pressure on Russia, going by how many vulnerabilities they have. And everybody is right now, there is a lot of infighting which is going on. In fact, my latest piece is on that, about how there is a rise of these two people, Kadyrov and Prigozhin. And there are other private armies also now coming up. Gazprom, which is an energy giant, they also made a private army. So there is an infighting which is going on. Every day, Prigozhin is releasing videos where he's abusing the defense minister and the chief of, the Russian army right now, Gerasimov, General Gerasimov and Shoigu. So there is a lot of infighting. So obviously that infighting is a vulnerable point which the West will try to take maximum advantage of. And the point is to try and build pressure on Russia through this counteroffensive, which will start eventually when the weather gets better, because unless you have the ground which has firmed up, you can't really roll tanks on it. So that's one. So maybe whenever the ground gets better, it could be 2-3 weeks or a month from now, and to bring things to a situation where they can have more favorable negotiations. Okay. And whether Ukraine is going to get back Crimea or not get back Crimea, I mean, I am not really fortune teller. I would rather say that let me see how the counteroffensive comes, and only then will I be able to say how long is the war going to go on, because right now, to my mind, it has already become an endless war. Okay. Unless a wild card entry happens, like, for example, the regime is destabilized in Russia, the infighting gets out of hand, suddenly, Zelensky is killed or something. So I don't know about those kind of things, but the way it's going, it looks like an endless war. And right now, with no clear victory or defeat in sight. Okay, that's one. The other thing is that, but for sure, whenever this war ends, okay, Ukraine is going to become a European Union member. For becoming a European Union member, you don't really just need to sign on certain papers. You need to basically transpose the entire European Union constitution to your constitution. Right now, Ukraine is at 69 to 70%. They started in 2014. They started to slowly change the articles of their constitution to make it more democratic, and also the lot of economic, that single market thing. But the war actually kind of brought a halt to it. But right now they are at about 69 to 70%. And even if that is an exaggeration, I would say, yeah, definitely more than 50%. So they are going to become a European Union member. Whether they become a NATO member, because you see, all the NATO chiefs have been saying that Ukraine is a future member, Ukraine is a future member. To my mind, it is not something which is very clear. I mean, I do not understand how exactly, because I would rather, take it up as a psychological pressure building tactic to say that, yes, we are behind Ukraine. I am not sure how Ukraine will become a NATO member until and unless they get all their occupied territory back from Russia, which includes Donbass and which includes Crimea. And this is not easy. Okay. Anybody who's realistic will tell you that this is far from, it's very easy, but very difficult to get it on the ground. But as far as the economic integration is concerned, we see that. Some couple of things about the G20 and stuff. I think what India is doing is that India definitely wants to play the role of a mediator. And something important I wanted to say in this regard, and that's why I brought it up. Mehraj, I think the war right now is at a situation, at a juncture where mediation efforts will not work. Okay, because we have all tried to mediate. China came up with the 12 piece. Of course, it's all a sham, but at least they came up with something. Pope tried to do it, Israel tried to do it, Turkey, India, everybody's trying to do it. It's not worked. Brazil, Lula tried to do it. I think it's not worked because we are unable to sort of understand the war dynamics. The war dynamic right now is to not give each other time for negotiation or talking, etc. But right now, if we want to do any mediation, and I wrote about it, I argued that it is better to go for limited mediation. Limited mediation means that you can't bring the war to an end, so there can't be 100% mediation. What you can do, however, is that you can identify certain issues and mediate just around those issues. And a very, very good example is the grain deal that Turkey did with the UN. Okay. Now, the war is still going on, but the grain deal allowed for the grain to actually reach its markets. Okay, so those kind of things, especially there could be limited mediation around prisoners of war. There could be limited mediation around, say, for example, the war crimes. Okay, if you talk about that, then perhaps you can actually use your leverage over a country, a leverage of friendship, a leverage of, your image, the leverage of neutrality, in a more effective manner, which will show you at least some result. So it will not be the best result, because the war is not going to end because of your mediation, but it can bring about the second best or the third best. And in a situation like today's, even that is a major step forward. So that is what I try to argue. And I think if you ask me genuinely, I think that is where India's, efforts should be converged. That how do you just pick up certain areas and then mediate around them, so that the overall destruction and the overall, escalation of the war can be helped in a more productive manner. So be it. And then as far as G20 is concerned, I think we want the war to end, to reach some sort of a decisive end, so that we are able to come up with a unified statement, towards the end of our G20 presidency. I'm not very hopeful of that. I'm not very sure. A lot of it depends on the direction of the counteroffensive per se. But like I said, that don't be under the impression that America or Europe is going to support Ukraine till eternity. No, that is not going to happen. Everybody has some sort of a timeline in mind. I think Ukraine understands that really well too. And they understand that 2023 could be their best bet to turn the war in a direction which is more favorable to them than it is right now. So that is the expectation that one should have from the war, from the counteroffensive. As far as ending it, I don't really see it ending anytime soon.